Hi, and welcome to Why Do Countries Exist, an episode on Turkish political parties. So today's episode was requested by Sam Volkers on YouTube. If you want me to do another country's political parties, please either comment it down below, send me an email, or put a request in the feedback and request form in the description. I currently have requests to do Danish parties, Serbian parties, Greek parties, Ukrainian parties, South Korean parties, Moroccan parties, Chilean parties, German parties, Moldovan parties, Swiss parties, and many more. Let's give a brief history lesson for some context. Turkey after World War I came under the control of Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. Ataturk greatly changed the new Turkish state, modernizing it, implementing a secular constitution, and him and his allies ruling the country from 1922 until 1950. A brief period of democracy was put in place from 1946 to 1960, but starting in 1960 and going until 1997, Turkish politics were in flux. As polarization led to political violence between leftists and rightists in the streets, various terror groups were formed, and Turkey suffered military rule at several points, with 4 different coups taking place. Turkish politics were somewhat stable in the 21st century, but economic problems, Kurdish separatism, right and left-wing terror groups, large-scale protests in the 2010s, an attempted coup in 2016, and authoritarianism all are signs that Turkish democracy is being less and less stable. Although who is to blame for this instability will vary depending on who you ask. Turkey's main legislative body is the Grand National Assembly. The assembly is made up of 600 deputies who are elected from 81 districts via proportional representation. Districts send more deputies based on the population within the district, with it ranging from Bayburt sending only 1 deputy to Istanbul's 1st and 3rd district, which both send 35 deputies. A party needs to get at least 7% of the vote in order to pass the electoral threshold, and get at least some seats in the assembly. A party also could run with a larger party and coalition and can ignore the threshold. The assembly will vote on rules and regulations and make changes to the constitution, although since Turkey changed its constitution in 2017, the legislature has been increasingly subordinate to the executive branch, the Turkish president. Finally, before we start going over the parties, there are 14 parties in the assembly. However, only 5 of these parties really are significant and with enough support to actually pass the threshold in the upcoming election in June 2023. And the rest are at least somewhat associated with one of the major parties. So for these 7 smaller parties, I'll talk about them right after I talk about their more significant father party. So first off, we go to the Adalet ve Kalkınma Partisi, or the Justice and Development Party, or AKP. The AKP has run the country since 2003, under its leader, founder, and president of Turkey, Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Erdogan has had a pretty interesting history which can help explain the AKP's position in Turkish politics. Erdogan became involved in Islamist politics in his youth, with Islamist groups serving as a non-violent alternative between the far-right Nationalist and the secular Marxist fighting in the 70s. Starting in the 90s, Erdogan and his allies began moderating his Islamist policies and began embracing more conservative positions, although never outright abandoning its Islamist background. Erdogan and the AKP today serve as a sort of mix between conservatism and more moderate Islamist ideology. So looking at the party's platform, it argues for a return to past tradition, to revitalize Turkey, and it does acknowledge Turkey as a secular state, but also at the end calls on Allah to help the Turkish nation. Regardless of its ideological background, the AKP is supported by those who are making less and feel ignored by society along with more devout Muslims. It also gets more support among older voters, those with less education, and those found in central Turkey along the Black Sea coast or in the diaspora. It leads the People's Alliance Coalition, which currently rules the country. It currently has 286 deputies and 11 million card-carrying members. The AKP is broadly right-wing and conservative, but it wouldn't be entirely accurate to make a one-to-one comparison between them and European conservative parties. The AKP favors, quote, a market economy that operates with all its institutions and rules, supports a strong welfare state based on conservative principles, favors more investment in infrastructure across the country, wants to promote easier access to healthcare and education, and supports privatizing state companies. The AKP at first was praised by liberals and Western commentators for reducing the power of the military and expanding rights for minority groups, although it nowadays is more socially conservative and nationalistic, promoting more Islamic education, opposes Western values taking over Turkey, and opposes further LGBTQ rights. Its foreign policy has sometimes been described as neo-Ottoman, meaning it supports Turkey playing a greater role in the region which formerly made up the Ottoman Empire. It supports militarily aiding the Syrian opposition in the Syrian civil war, strongly opposes Kurdish separatism, wanting a greater crackdown on Kurdish militants. It wants to improve relations with Central Asian republics and the Balkan states, and while formerly fairly pro-EU, has become less so, although they still don't support a necessarily 100% antagonistic relationship with them. The AKP and Erdogan has been in power for almost 2 decades, but they have not been in power without controversy. Erdogan's origins as an Islamist has been controversial, as his more secular opponents see him as promoting a creeping Islamification of Turkish society and supporting the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, although the AKP fiercely denies the Islamist label and argues that the Muslim Brotherhood is not as bad as Egypt's military government and the West argues it is. As stated previously, the AKP was initially supported by liberals, but starting in the early 2010s, the party has been increasingly more and more authoritarian, cracking down on the opposition, such as recently the opposition mayor of Istanbul being officially banned from participating in politics, arresting opposition figures, controlling the press, and building a cult of personality around Erdogan. The AKP also has been criticized for both interfering and de facto invading northern Syria, mismanaging the economy which has led to massive levels of inflation, and a growing number of Turks have become increasingly upset with Erdogan letting in over 3 million Syrian refugees into the country, the most out of any country in the world. While the AKP is sometimes criticized as Islamist, it also has been criticized for not being Islamist enough. The Saadet Partisi, or the Felicity Party, or SP, is an Islamist party. Both SP and the AKP were formed in 2001, when the Virtue Party, an Islamist party, broke in two, with SP being the rump, more principled faction, while the AKP was a larger, more moderate faction. The SP opposes EU membership, calls for reviewing Turkish membership in NATO, arguing the alliance is pointless, is pro-Palestinian, supports more autonomy for East Turkestan, or Xinjiang, and favors increased cooperation with neighboring Islamist states, Central Asian Turkish states, and Russia. Also, even though it is described on Wikipedia as Islamist, and is seen as supporters of the Milli Görüş movement, on its website it doesn't really discuss Islamist issues, or push for increased prominence of Islam in Turkish society. This may partially be because it is currently a part of the opposition Nation Alliance, with a variety of secular parties, and worked with them in the 2018 election. Its last election got the most support in Batman and Baber province. It currently has 1 deputy and 273,000 card-carrying members. It is led by Temel Karakumoğlu, a former mayor of Sivas and deputy. The AKP also had a break-off in 2020, with the Demokrasi ve Adalet Partisi, or Democracy and Progress Party, or DEVA, being formed. DEVA was formed by its current leader, IyI Party, a former Minister of the Economy and Foreign Affairs. Babacan and DEVA represents those liberals and pro-EU conservatives who have grown more dissatisfied with the AKP as it's become more authoritarian. In an interview with Vocal Europe, the party claimed it was founded by a collection of ex-ministers, bureaucrats, businessmen, and academics who favored a more moderate and pro-Western approach in the country. It also favors a strong parliamentary system, wants to lower the electoral threshold, wants to prevent public deficits, and wants to crack down on corruption. It has held talks with parties in the Nation Alliance and may join the alliance in the next election in 2023. It currently has 1 deputy and 153,000 card-carrying members. We go next to the Milliyetçi Hareket Partisi, or the Nationalist Movement Party, or MHP. The MHP is a hard-right party embracing a combination of Turkic nationalism, pan-Turkism, right-wing populism, and even some Islamism all mixed together. It was formed in the 60s and has more or less been active since then, serving as the furthest right group in the assembly. While initially it was hostile towards Erdogan and his more moderate Islamism, as the years have gone on, the MHP has become more friendly with the AKP. In 2018, it formed the People's Alliance with the AKP and serves as confidence and supply and helping prop up Erdogan. It gets the most support, unsurprisingly, from Turkic nationalists, getting the most support in central Anatolia, and particularly in Osmaniye province. It currently has 48 deputies and 480,000 card-carrying members. It is currently led by Devlet Bahçeli, a former deputy prime minister and current deputy. The MHP backs a lot of nationalistic policies. It opposes recognizing the Armenian genocide as a genocide. It supports Azerbaijan in the Karabakh conflict. It opposes peace deals with the PKK, just generally opposing separatism, regionalism, or any other movement that seeks to move power away from Ankara or divide the Turkish nation. And even wants to ban the HDP party, accusing them of being traitors, which I'll explain later. It also historically fought for a strong presidential system, is pro-Palestinian, generally supports a more interventionist economic policy, and is hostile towards the EU. The MHP is often criticized for being racist and xenophobic. While I've seen different sources call them either the official youth wing of the party or just an organization with ties to the party, generally it seems the Grey Wolves are linked to the party. The Grey Wolves are a militant ultra-nationalist organization that has, since the 60s, carried out violent acts against Turkish leftist, Kurdish separatist, and religious/ethnic minorities, and have fought in several conflicts around the world, such as the Karabakh conflict, the Syrian Civil War, and the conflict in Xinjiang. Probably their most deadly attack was when they killed over 100 Alawite Muslims in Maras over the course of 5 days. This kind of violent ultranationalism has led to a lot of condemnation both in Turkey among centrist and leftist, and abroad, with both the EU Parliament and Kazakhstan declaring the Grey Wolves a terrorist organization. I suspect that this association with radical nationalists is partially why the MHP has no ministers in the AKP government, serving only as support since the AKP doesn't want to be associated with them. Working with the AKP also has been controversial, as a faction of the party has broke off, which we will talk about later. Finally, the party has seen it fall in opinion polls, hovering barely above the electoral threshold, although the election is still several months away. An older breakoff of the MHP is the Büyük Birlik Partisi, or Great Unity Party, or BBP. The BBP was formed in 1993 due to disagreements between them and the MHP party leadership. The party seems to be described as occupying a similar position to the MHP, although a bit more Islamic-focused and more principled. However, it since 2018 has worked with both the MHP and the AKP, being a part of the People's Alliance. Notably, the BBP also is connected with the Alperen Hearths, a youth movement that holds a similar Islamic nationalist position and apparently sent a group of volunteers to fight in Syria. It currently has one deputy, who is also its party leader, Mustafa Destisha. It also has 98,000 card-carrying members. Now we go to the main opposition parties. We will start off with Cumhuriyet Halk Partisi, or Republican People's Party, or CHP. The CHP has existed, although at times it has been suppressed, since 1923, being the party of Ataturk. It ran the country from 1923 until 1950, almost unopposed, greatly influencing country. From 1950 to 1977, it was on and off again the largest party. Then it was banned from 1977 to 1995, and re-emerged in 1995 and has remained the largest opposition party to Erdogan since 2002. It, being the party of Ataturk, embraces an ideology known as Kemalism, an ideology that has 6 main principles, or arrows: republicanism, people's power/populism, nationalism, laicism/secularism, statism/government involvement in the economy, and reformism. Generally, what this all means is the CHP is a party embracing generally center-left ideas, with nationalistic undertones. However, as we will talk about later on, the party isn't unified politically, with various different factions ranging from nationalist centrists to democratic socialists within the party. The CHP's main support base has been a combination of academics, government bureaucrats, the secular middle class, trade unionists, those along the Mediterranean coast and in Thrace, urban youth, and to a lesser extent among minorities. It also historically was supported by the military and those in central and eastern Anatolia. It heads the opposition Nation Alliance. The party currently has 134 deputies and 1.3 million members. It is currently led by Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, a deputy. The CHP is a center-left party, so it backs stuff like raising the minimum wage, supports government involvement in the economy, and supports a social market economy. It, in recent years, has spent a lot of energy arguing for Turkish institutions to be given more strength, wanting more power to the assembly rather than the president, opposes corruption, wants to end government crackdowns on the opposition, and calls for a return to the rule of law. It also supports more cooperation with the EU, supports a secular state, wants less Syrian refugees into the country, with Kılıçdaroğlu actually calling for refugees to be removed, and supports a sort of civic nationalist identity, where everyone in Turkey embraces a Turkish national identity, but opposes discrimination based on ethnicity. While the CHP is critical of Erdogan's authoritarianism, the CHP's historic support base of the military does make them seem a bit hypocritical, since the Turkish military was the one imprisoning Islamist and opposition figures a couple decades ago. This historical association with the powerful and the elite has led the CHP to be seen by its opponents as elitist and not really caring about the interest of the average Turk. The CHP's secular and pro-EU stance also has led to them being viewed negatively by some, since they are seen as trying to make Turkey into a European-like state or even a puppet of Europe itself. The CHP, as mentioned earlier, is divided into several different factions which all compete and fight with each other, making the party look weak and disorganized. And finally, among ethnic minorities or more leftist Turks, they feel the party is too moderate and doesn't go far enough to oppose the right. All this has made the CHP to appear incompetent, which helps explain why the AKP, despite becoming more unpopular as the Turkish economy has grown weaker, is still far above the CHP in opinion polls. The CHP's infighting has led to two separate breakoffs. The larger breakoff is the Millet Partisi, or Homeland Party, or MP. MP broke off from the CHP in 2020, largely as a protest of the CHP's leadership, claiming they were unable to actually break the AKP's monopoly on power. It was, and still is today, led by Muharrem İnce, an ex-deputy and the CHP's presidential candidate in the 2018 election, and he and the party have largely continued to be critical of the CHP and the National Alliance, claiming the alliance will not actually talk policies. The Homeland Party right now has 2 deputies, and does have around 22,000 card-carrying members. The smaller breakoff is the Yenilik Partisi, or Innovation Party, or YP. YP broke off from the CHP in 2020, also protesting party leadership. YP's founder, Öztürk Yılmaz, who is the party's sole deputy, also apparently called for the call to prayer to be in Turkic rather than Arabic, which caused strain within the party. Ultimately, it seems both YP and MP are largely parties that serve more as protests of the CHP, and don't really have the support base to win elections or even really threaten the CHP. This is sort of a trend for most of the small break-off parties I will talk about, but frankly, with the MP and YP, it is the most obvious. YP has 3,000 card-carrying members. We move left with the Halkların Demokrati Partisi, or the People's Democratic Party, or HDP. The HDP can largely be seen as the opposite of the MHP, being the furthest left of the major Turkish parties and getting its support base largely among minorities. In particular, the party is seen as the party of the Kurds, with most of its votes coming from the Kurdistan region in Turkey, and most of its politicians being Kurds. It also does get some support in urban cities in the West and among more left-leaning Turks. It currently leads the Labor and Freedom Alliance, a coalition of leftist parties. It currently has 57 deputies and 43,000 members. It is currently led by Pervin Buldan and Mihat Şatşar, both deputies. The HDP states that its top priority is, quote, achieving peace in Turkey, so it wants the government to negotiate with the PKK, a Kurdish separatist paramilitary organization that has been waging war in the Kurdistan region and has been labeled as a terror group by Turkey and several Western states. It wants more autonomy at the local level, wants the right to education in one's native language, and opposes discrimination. It also opposes neoliberal reform, opposes imperialist intervention in the Middle East, supports direct democracy, supports women quotas in certain businesses, supports greater LGBTQ rights, and supports more environmental regulations. The HDP's pro-peace position has made the party hated among some Turks, particularly among Turkic nationalists. The HDP is accused by the right of being outright controlled by the PKK, serving as the legal arm of their organization. While the HDP deny this, it has led to pretty much all parties, except Marxist-inspired ones, to view the party as a de facto enemy of the Turkish state, which is why the MHP wants to ban them. The HDP has always been in a precarious position, always on the verge of being outright banned, and many high-ranking members in the party are actually right now in jail being accused of terrorism. All this has made it very difficult for the party to operate, expand, and grow, so it's pretty much impossible for them to grow or gain a sizable support base outside the Kurdistan region. The party is also too left-wing and radical to really work with the more mainstream National Alliance, so they are stuck in the position of always being in the opposition, but knowing they can't moderate too much for fear of losing their support base. While the CHP and the AKP have an antagonistic relationship with their smaller adjacent parties, The HDP is actually fairly close with its two adjacent parties. The larger party is the IyI Party, or the Turkish Workers' Party, or TIP. TIP is a Marxist-Leninist party that was formed in 2018 as a merger of several Marxist organizations and individuals. It competed in the 2018 election, with the HDP getting a couple deputies elected. It apparently is self-described as getting a lot of support among both women and the youth. It argues for Turkey to oppose NATO, the EU, and the IMF, opposing imperialism and capitalism, wants to fight for more equality for women and the LGBTQ community, and supports peace between Turkey and the Kurds. It is a part of the Labor and Freedom Alliance with the HDP. It currently has 4 deputies and 8,000 members. It is currently led by Erkan Bas, a deputy. The smaller adjacent party is the Demokratik Bölgeler Partisi, or the Democratic Regions Party, or DBP. While the TIP has its own ideological distinctions between it and the HDP, and are seen as being its own organization, the DBP is seen as pretty much just the HDP under a different name. The DBP was originally called the Peace and Freedom Party, or BDP, and the idea was the BDP would contest elections in Kurd-majority regions, while the HDP would contest elections everywhere else. However, in 2014, the parties effectively merged, with the BDP being turned into the DBP, and serving more as just an ally to the HDP, and an organization that could be used if the HDP was ever banned. It currently has 1 deputy and almost 7,000 members. It is led by Selala Ayendiz, a deputy, and Keska Bayındır, a teacher. The last major party we will talk about is the IyI Party, or Good Party. IyI was founded in 2017 by ex-MHP members upset that the party was moving into being an ally of Erdogan. It wanted a new nationalistic party that based its nationalism around civic nationalism, similar to Kemalism, although still on the right. So it's sort of seen as a party for right-wingers who don't like the AKP, or centrists who don't feel comfortable voting for the CHP. It gets the most support from those in the West, particularly in Thrace or in the Southwest. It is currently in the National Alliance and working with the CHP, SP, and DEVA. It currently has 37 deputies and 568,000 members. It is currently led by Meral Akşener, a former deputy and Minister of the Interior. IyI supports many of the same policies of the CHP. It wants a return to a parliamentary system of governance, opposes discrimination in Turkey, wants a secular state, and is in favor of both the EU and NATO. Economically, it supports privatization, supports a welfare state, wants to lower unemployment while also raising the income of the average Turk, supports more automation, and wants to get more money from tourists who visit Turkey. It also supports more women entering the workforce, wants to improve women's education, and wants more legal protections for animals. Since IyI is a relatively young party whose origins are barely 5 years old, it can be hard to get a sense of where the party is in Turkish politics or how they are viewed. I would suspect that many right-wing Turks may reject the party, since it has made rejecting Erdogan and the AKP one of its central tenets, something the majority of right-wingers in Turkey are supportive of, and IyI can be seen as useful idiots of the CHP. Meanwhile, more left-wing people may see the party as dragging the CHP to the right, and it being similar to the AKP in the early 2000s, a right-wing party that will ultimately embrace more authoritarian measures once they get into power. The fact that they are a nationalist party who came from the ultranationalist MHP also will likely alienate minorities who feel the party is too close to a xenophobic nationalist. IyI is close to a smaller center-right party known as the Demokrat Partisi, or the Democrat Party, or the DP. DP is a center-right conservative party, representing a continuation of the pre-2000s right-wing parties, like the True Path Party or the older Democrat Party. The center-right in Turkey has been out of the assembly since 2002, largely because most center-right voters have found a home in the AKP, CHP, or some other party. In the latest election, it was a part of the National Alliance, contesting elections with the IyI Party. It wants the state to regulate the economy to prevent monopolies or unfair business practices, wants to improve the education system in the country, back secularism, wants to create a Senate that will deal with constitution questions, and wants to reduce tension between Turks and ethnic minorities. It currently has 2 deputies and 397,000 members. It is currently led by Gültekin Uysal, a deputy. And finally, the last party we will briefly go over is the Zafer Partisi, or Victory Party, or ZP. ZP is a breakoff of IyI, founded largely around its party leader and current deputy, Ümit Özdağ. Özdağ was formerly a part of the MHP and then joined IyI, although he quickly found himself alienated in this new party. Ozdog opposed an alliance with the CHP and critiqued the pro-EU stance of E. In 2020, he was removed from E, and in 2021, he founded ZP. ZP's main policy is to remove all migrants and refugees from Turkey, arguing they are putting too much strain on the Turkish economy and infrastructure. Ozdog is the only deputy, and it has 10,000 members. So those are the parties of Turkey. In conclusion, Turkey is dominated by 5 major parties: the AKP, which is sort of a combination of moderate Islamists and conservatives, and dominates the government; the MHP, which is made up of Turkic nationalists and supports the AKP; the CHP, which represents the main Kemalist opposition and its ally E, which represents anti-Erdogan right-wingers and centrist; the HDP, which is largely a Kurdish party and left-wing; and finally a collection of small parties often connected with or is a breakoff of a larger party and usually based around a prominent member. Turkey will have elections in June of 2023, so just a couple months away, and it seems right now the stakes are quite high. Opposition supporters are implying more and more that if they lose, democracy will be dead in Turkey, and right now opinion polls are showing it's probably going to be pretty close. What will happen and how Turkish political parties will respond is something we will have to see. So before I go over podcast updates, 2 small musings that I kind of had. I was thinking about it last night, and I said earlier that the AKP is it's not a good idea to compare the AKP to European conservatives as a 1-to-1 comparison. But I think the best party you could compare it to is PIS in Poland. Both are conservative, but also both are not economically right-wing. They're much more statist in that sense. And also both are hostile towards the EU, or at least further expansion of the EU. And also both are accused of authoritarianism by their opponents. And then also one thing I didn't talk about with the MHP, but in 2015 there was all these reports of the Chinese imprisoning Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang. And so a lot of Turkic nationalists were very, very upset with that. And so the MHP sort of there was a couple of racist attacks against Chinese people, or actually people who they thought were Chinese but weren't actually. And there's one banner that was just so insane that it's so comically over the top that it's a little bit funny. It sounds less like an actual person would say this and more like a supervillain. So they had a banner in one of their party headquarters that apparently read, quote unquote, "We crave Chinese blood," which is I don't even that's it's such a bizarre and horrible thing to have on your party headquarters that it's just truly baffling. I have no idea who thought that was a good idea. And also it's so over the top that it's kind of funny, but also people were attacked in Istanbul. That's sort of why I'm placing it at the very end, just because I didn't really know where to put it. And I'm also just not 100% sure how to tackle it, because again, it's so over the top and bizarre that I want to laugh at it. But again, knowing the background that people were attacked because of that sort of sentiment, it's it's not, it kind of loses its funniness, It's just such a weird quote that I feel I should bring it up, but also I don't 100% know how to. But yeah, up next we will talk about Danish political parties. Then I will look at the history of the Central African Republic, and then I will look at Serbian political parties. So thanks for listening, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you want, you can email me at whydocountriesexist@gmail.com for your thoughts, comments, suggestions, or hate mail. Take care. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.